Airport security questions Black traveler, discovers he's a UN diplomat. In today's interconnected world, travel has transformed from a privilege for the few into a fundamental aspect of modern life, enabling individuals to explore new cultures, forge international connections, and engage in global commerce. Airports, once viewed simply as gateways to different destinations, have evolved into bustling hubs of diversity where people from all walks of life converge. They represent freedom, opportunity, and the promise of new beginnings. However, amidst this vibrant tapestry of humanity lies a troubling undercurrent: racial profiling. This practice, which unfairly targets individuals based on their race or ethnicity, undermines the very principles of equality and justice that airports are supposed to embody. Before we can continue, if you love your family, subscribe to this channel to help up creating amazing stories. Now, let's continue. The incident that unfolded in the VIP lounge of a bustling international airport encapsulates this issue with alarming clarity. A Black traveler, expecting a moment of peace before his flight, found himself in a distressing situation when he was subjected to scrutiny by airport security personnel. What began as a routine check quickly escalated into an uncomfortable interrogation, driven not by any suspicious behavior, but by the color of his skin. This moment not only highlights the harsh realities of racial profiling, but also calls into question the efficacy of airport security measures designed to ensure the safety of all travelers. As the man settled into the plush environment of the lounge, surrounded by fellow passengers engrossed in their own worlds, he could never have anticipated the racial bias that would soon disrupt his journey. The atmosphere was calm, with the soft hum of conversations and the gentle clinking of glasses creating a soothing backdrop. However, this tranquil setting turned hostile when he was approached by two security officers who viewed him with a mixture of suspicion and skepticism. The questions they posed were laced with underlying assumptions, leaving the traveler to grapple with the uncomfortable realization that he was being scrutinized for reasons unrelated to his actions or demeanor. This encounter does not exist in isolation. It reflects a pervasive and systemic issue that affects countless individuals, particularly those from marginalized communities. Racial profiling in airport security is not a rare occurrence, but rather a manifestation of deeply rooted societal biases that continue to shape the experiences of people of color. The significance of this story extends beyond the individual experience of the traveler. It serves as a lens through which we can examine the broader implications of racial discrimination within the context of airport security practices. The implications of racial profiling are far-reaching, impacting not only the individuals who are targeted, but also the communities they represent. The Black traveler's experience in the VIP lounge underscores the need for a critical examination of the practices employed by airport security personnel. These practices, often steeped in bias and prejudice, perpetuate harmful stereotypes that suggest individuals from certain racial backgrounds are inherently suspicious. This assumption not only creates an atmosphere of distrust, but also perpetuates cycles of discrimination that erode the foundational principles of equality and justice. In exploring the significance of this incident, it is essential to delve into the traveler's background, examining the professional identity that underscores his status as a UN diplomat. As a respected member of an international organization, his role involved advocating for peace, justice, and human rights across the globe. Yet, even in this capacity, he found himself subject to the same prejudices and stereotypes that countless others face daily. This reality speaks volumes about the pervasive nature of racial profiling, demonstrating that no level of education or professional accomplishment can shield individuals from the impacts of discrimination. The traveler's experience also highlights the broader societal context in which racial profiling operates. Throughout history, marginalized communities have endured systemic oppression, with racial discrimination serving as a tool of social control. From the Jim Crow laws in the United States to apartheid in South Africa, the legacy of racial profiling is deeply embedded in the fabric of societies worldwide. This historical context is crucial in understanding the persistence of bias and discrimination, as the structures that enable these injustices are often entrenched within societal norms and institutional practices. As the incident in the VIP lounge unfolded, It became evident that the security personnel's behavior was rooted in implicit biases that influenced their perceptions of the traveler. Their initial skepticism and suspicion exemplified a broader trend in airport security, where racial profiling often manifests as a misguided attempt to ensure safety. The officers' actions were not isolated incidents, but rather reflective of a systemic issue that necessitates urgent attention and reform. Their questioning of the traveler was not merely a routine security measure. It was a clear indication of the biases that can cloud judgment and lead to discriminatory practices. The traveler's revelation of his diplomatic status served as a pivotal moment in the encounter, illustrating how identity and privilege can drastically alter perceptions of worth and respect. Upon presenting his credentials, the demeanor of the security personnel shifted dramatically. What had begun as a tense interrogation transformed into a scene marked by deference and apology, underscoring the unsettling reality that an individual's value is often tied to their title rather than their inherent dignity as a human being. This stark contrast raises critical questions about the nature of authority, respect, and the underlying biases that dictate how individuals are treated in various contexts. Moreover, the incident serves as a reminder of the psychological toll that racial profiling can inflict on individuals. The traveler's experience is not just a matter of policy or procedure. It is a deeply personal journey marked by feelings of vulnerability, alienation, and frustration. Being subjected to unwarranted scrutiny based on race can have profound implications for an individual's mental health and sense of self-worth. The emotional burden of navigating such encounters can lead to heightened anxiety, diminished self-esteem, and a pervasive sense of distrust in systems that are meant to ensure safety and security. As discussions surrounding racial equality and social justice gain momentum globally, the need for systemic change becomes increasingly apparent. The traveler's experience in the VIP lounge serves as a microcosm of the broader challenges that exist within airport security practices. It highlights the urgent need for reform aimed at dismantling the structures that perpetuate racial profiling and discrimination. Advocacy groups, civil society, and individuals must come together to demand accountability and transparency from airport authorities, urging them to prioritize equity and respect for all travelers, regardless of their race or background. Furthermore, the incident underscores the importance of cultural competency in security training. Airport personnel must be equipped with the knowledge and skills necessary to engage with a diverse range of travelers respectfully and equitably. This includes understanding the historical context of racial profiling, recognizing the biases that can influence behavior, and actively working to mitigate their impacts. Training programs that emphasize empathy, awareness, and cultural sensitivity are essential in fostering an environment where all individuals feel safe and valued. The implications of this incident extend beyond the immediate context of the airport. They raise broader questions about the role of institutions in perpetuating or dismantling systemic bias. Airports serve as gateways to the world, and as such, they must reflect the values of inclusivity and respect that underpin a just society. The normalization of racial profiling in airport security creates an environment where individuals from marginalized communities must constantly navigate a landscape fraught with suspicion and hostility. This not only affects their sense of safety, but also diminishes their opportunities for personal and professional growth. Ultimately, the story of the Black traveler in the airport lounge is one of resilience and awareness. It compels us to confront uncomfortable truths about the ways in which racial bias infiltrates various aspects of our lives, from everyday interactions to institutional policies. As we reflect on the significance of this incident, it becomes clear that the need for reform in airport security practices is not just a matter of policy, but a moral imperative. The quest for equality and justice must extend to every facet of society, including spaces that should epitomize inclusivity and acceptance. The airport, as a microcosm of society, has the potential to be a place where diversity is celebrated and respected rather than a battleground for prejudice and discrimination. The traveler's story serves as a powerful reminder of the collective responsibility we share in dismantling the structures of inequality that continue to plague our world. By acknowledging the impact of racial profiling and advocating for systemic change, we can work towards a future where all individuals are treated with dignity, respect, and fairness. As we delve deeper into this narrative, we will explore the layers of this story, examining the traveler's background, the dynamics of the encounter with security personnel, and the broader implications for airport security and society as a whole. This journey is not just about one individual's experience, but about the collective responsibility we share in confronting our biases and challenging the status quo. The time for change is now, and it begins with acknowledging the power of our stories and the urgency of our actions. Together, we can forge a path toward a more equitable and just society, ensuring that the ideals of freedom and opportunity are truly accessible to all. The VIP lounge of an international airport is often viewed as a sanctuary, a haven for weary travelers seeking a moment of respite from the bustling chaos that typically characterizes airports. It's a place where the amenities are designed to offer comfort and convenience, from plush seating and complimentary refreshments to serene environments that facilitate relaxation or productivity. The traveler had settled into this space, taking a moment to gather his thoughts before embarking on a long flight, little suspecting that his experience would soon take a sharp and distressing turn. As he reclined in a comfortable chair, a warm cup of coffee in hand, he observed the diverse array of passengers surrounding him. Business travelers, families, and tourists were all engaged in their own pursuits, engrossed in conversations, tapping away on laptops, or simply savoring the quietude before their journeys. The atmosphere was one of shared anticipation, the gentle hum of chatter punctuated by the soft clinks of glasses and the rustling of magazines. It was a moment where the pressures of travel seemed to fade away, replaced by a sense of belonging in this elevated space. However, this tranquil environment quickly dissolved when two airport security personnel approached him with an air of authority. Their presence was sudden, and their expressions were stern, which immediately raised a red flag in the traveler's mind. He could feel the shift in the atmosphere as they walked toward him, their gaze fixed upon him with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. The vibrant buzz of the lounge faded into the background, replaced by the quickening of his heartbeat and the rising tension in his chest. "Excuse me, sir, can we ask you a few questions?" one of the officers said, his tone direct but lacking any semblance of warmth. The question, though seemingly innocuous, felt charged with an undertone of suspicion. The traveler nodded, though he felt a knot forming in his stomach. He had been questioned by security before, but this time felt different. The very fact that he was singled out in a space designed for exclusivity and relaxation sent a clear message. He was seen as an anomaly rather than an esteemed guest. The initial questions were generic, inquiries about his travel plans, destination, and the purpose of his trip. Yet, there was an unspoken subtext that loomed heavily in the air. The security officers exchanged glances as they continued to question him, and it was clear that their assumptions about his identity were shaping their line of inquiry. The traveler could sense that they were not just asking for information. They were scrutinizing him, assessing whether he belonged in the space, and whether he was a threat. In those moments, he found himself grappling with an overwhelming sense of injustice. Here he was, a black man in a VIP lounge, a UN diplomat on official business, yet he was being treated as if he were a common criminal. The contrast between the environment around him and the treatment he was receiving was jarring. Other passengers looked on, some casting curious glances, while others chose to avert their eyes, perhaps uncomfortable with the scene unfolding before them. The atmosphere in the lounge, once welcoming and inviting, felt increasingly hostile as the questioning continued. The traveler's mind raced as he considered the implications of this encounter. Was his status as a diplomat not enough to shield him from the biases that permeated society? Did the security personnel see the suit he wore, the briefcase at his side, or the badge identifying him as a representative of the United Nations? Or were they blinded by the color of his skin, reducing him to a stereotype rather than acknowledging his professional accomplishments? The questioning intensified as the security officers pressed further, digging into his background and travel history with an intensity that felt disproportionate to the circumstances. They seemed fixated on confirming his identity, conducting checks that felt invasive and unnecessary. The traveler attempted to remain calm, aware that losing his composure would only exacerbate the situation. He knew he had done nothing wrong, yet he felt the weight of their suspicion bearing down on him. "Do you have any identification with you?" one officer asked, leaning in slightly as if that would somehow uncover some hidden truth. The request struck him as unnecessary. He was already in a secured area, and his presence alone should have been enough to affirm his status. Nevertheless, he complied, reaching for his wallet and producing his UN diplomat identification. In that moment, the atmosphere shifted once again. As the officers glanced at the identification, their expressions began to change. The skepticism that had previously clouded their demeanor gave way to a cautious respect. The tension that had suffused the air lessened, and a palpable sense of embarrassment flickered across their faces. They had made an assumption based solely on the traveler's race and the unfounded belief that he did not belong in the VIP lounge. It was a sobering reminder of how quickly biases could manifest in the most unexpected of situations. The traveler felt a mixture of relief and frustration as he watched their demeanor shift. Relief that they were no longer treating him as a suspect, but frustration that he had to justify his presence in a space that should have been welcoming. This encounter had transformed from a routine security check into a confrontation that revealed the underlying prejudices embedded within the security apparatus itself. "I'm here on official business," he stated firmly, seeking to assert his identity as a diplomat who is contributing to international dialogue and cooperation. "I represent my country at the United Nations, and I'm traveling to meet with my colleagues." His voice was steady, fueled by a desire to reclaim his dignity in the face of unwarranted scrutiny. As the security personnel processed this new information, a palpable change occurred in their behavior. They exchanged hesitant glances, and one of the officers muttered an apology, his earlier confidence crumbling in the face of the traveler's credentials. "We didn't mean to imply anything," he said, his tone softer now, almost deferential. "We're just doing our jobs." This response, while somewhat mitigating, did little to erase the damage that had been done. The traveler knew that countless individuals, particularly those from marginalized backgrounds, faced similar encounters on a regular basis. He was acutely aware that his experience, while disheartening, was not unique. It was a reflection of a larger issue that permeated airport security protocols and practices, where individuals were often judged by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. The incident illuminated the deeply ingrained biases that permeate security practices at airports, where assumptions are often made based on superficial markers of identity. This practice not only infringes upon the dignity of individuals, but also compromises the integrity of security protocols designed to protect all travelers. The traveler's experience serves as a poignant reminder of the urgent need for reform within airport security systems, a call to action to dismantle the structures of bias and prejudice that have become commonplace in these settings. As the encounter concluded, the traveler gathered himself and moved away from the security personnel, still processing the emotions that surged within him. He couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that had accompanied the questioning. The confidence he had carried into the lounge had been challenged, and while he had emerged from the situation without any tangible consequences, the emotional impact would linger long after he departed. As he resumed his place in the lounge, the cacophony of sounds returned, but the experience had irrevocably altered his perception of the environment around him. The sense of belonging he had felt upon entering was now tinged with caution and wariness. He glanced at the other travelers, pondering how many of them had encountered similar prejudices, how many had been forced to navigate a world that so often diminished their worth based solely on the color of their skin. The atmosphere in the VIP lounge, which had initially seemed so inviting, now felt like a facade, a veneer of comfort that masked the harsh realities of discrimination and bias. The traveler realized that he was not just an individual caught in a moment of misunderstanding. He was part of a larger narrative, one that demanded attention and action. His experience was a reminder that the journey toward equity and justice required constant vigilance and commitment to dismantling the barriers that perpetuated discrimination. In reflecting on this incident, it becomes evident that moments like these are not just isolated occurrences. They are emblematic of a systemic issue that permeates society. The traveler's experience in the VIP lounge serves as a catalyst for broader conversations about race, identity, and the urgent need for reform within airport security practices. As he prepared to continue his journey, he carried with him the weight of this encounter, an encounter that would shape not only his understanding of the world but also his resolve to advocate for change in the face of systemic injustice. Ultimately, the incident that unfolded in the VIP lounge is a call to action, a reminder that the fight against racial profiling and discrimination is far from over. It underscores the importance of recognizing our shared humanity and the need to create environments where individuals are treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their race or background. The traveler's story is one of resilience and advocacy, illuminating the path toward a more just and equitable society where all individuals can navigate the world without fear of bias or discrimination. As the traveler settled back into the plush seat of the VIP lounge, he took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought him to this point. A Black man in a high-ranking position at the United Nations, he had worked tirelessly to earn his place at the table of international diplomacy. His journey was marked by significant accomplishments and a commitment to fostering global cooperation, yet it was also intertwined with the realities of navigating a world that often viewed him through the lens of racial bias. Born and raised in a multicultural city, he had always been acutely aware of the diverse tapestry of humanity surrounding him. His parents, immigrants who had come to the country seeking better opportunities, instilled in him the importance of education and hard work. They often shared stories of their struggles, emphasizing the need to rise above adversity and pursue one's dreams relentlessly. Inspired by their resilience, he dedicated himself to his studies, earning a scholarship to a prestigious university where he pursued a degree in international relations. During his time at university, he immersed himself in the complexities of global politics, studying the intricacies of diplomacy, conflict resolution, and international law. He participated in various student organizations and initiatives, striving to amplify underrepresented voices in discussions about global issues. His passion for social justice and equity propelled him to seek opportunities that would allow him to effect meaningful change on a global scale. Upon graduating with honors, he was offered a position at the United Nations, where he quickly rose through the ranks, gaining recognition for his innovative approaches to diplomacy. He specialized in programs focused on human rights, economic development, and environmental sustainability, advocating for marginalized communities worldwide. His work took him to various countries, where he engaged with local leaders, grassroots organizations, and international stakeholders, all with the aim of fostering dialogue and collaboration. However, despite his achievements and accolades, he was not immune to the realities of racial profiling and discrimination. Each time he traveled, he was reminded that his identity as a Black man often preceded his accomplishments. The traveler recounted instances where his professionalism was questioned, where he had to assert his credibility time and again, even in environments designed for high-level discussions. The experiences served as a stark reminder that in many spaces, particularly those dominated by predominantly white leadership, his presence was often seen as an anomaly. On this particular trip, he was traveling to a crucial UN conference aimed at addressing climate change and its impact on vulnerable populations. The stakes were high, and he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He had spent months preparing for this event, coordinating with diplomats from various countries and strategizing on how best to advocate for sustainable practices that prioritize the needs of those most affected by climate change. The conference would gather world leaders, environmental activists, and representatives from developing nations, all focused on finding solutions to one of the most pressing issues of our time. His travel itinerary was packed, filled with meetings, presentations, and negotiations. As he prepared to depart, he reviewed his notes, ensuring that he was ready to articulate the concerns of those he represented. He understood that the outcomes of this conference could have lasting implications for policy and funding, and he was determined to make his voice heard. In the lead-up to his departure, the traveler reflected on his experiences as a Black diplomat navigating the corridors of power. He recalled a recent meeting at the UN where he had presented a proposal aimed at increasing funding for renewable energy projects in Africa. Despite the thorough research and compelling arguments he had presented, He sensed the skepticism in the room. Some of his colleagues had subtly dismissed his ideas, questioning the feasibility of implementing such initiatives in regions historically marginalized in global discussions. These experiences were not isolated incidents. They were part of a broader narrative that Black professionals faced in their respective fields. The traveler had come to recognize that, while he had achieved significant milestones in his career, there remained an ongoing battle against the biases that sought to undermine his credibility and contributions. It was a painful realization that despite his accomplishments, he was still seen through a racialized lens that often overshadowed his qualifications. As he prepared for the upcoming conference, he could not shake the feeling that this trip would likely be another chapter in a narrative filled with both triumphs and tribulations. The travel experience had often been marred by systemic issues, with security protocols disproportionately affecting individuals from marginalized backgrounds. He remembered the countless times he had been stopped for additional screening at airports, his bags searched more thoroughly than those of his white counterparts, and the all-too-familiar questions that seemed aimed at ascertaining his status rather than ensuring safety. His previous experiences were etched in his memory, each instance of racial profiling serving as a reminder of the barriers he faced. One particular incident stood out in his mind, a trip to a global summit where he had been delayed at the airport due to an extra security check. While he had observed other passengers, including those who looked nothing like him, breeze through without incident, he had been subjected to a lengthy interrogation about his purpose and background. The event had left him feeling humiliated and disheartened, forcing him to confront the reality that his identity would always be questioned in a world that often relegated him to a stereotype. On that fateful day at the airport, as he prepared to board his flight to the UN conference, he hoped that this trip would be different. He hoped that the security personnel would recognize him for who he was, a diplomat working tirelessly to address critical global issues, rather than seeing him through the narrow lens of racial profiling. He yearned for a travel experience free from the shadow of suspicion, a chance to navigate the airport with the dignity he deserved. As he settled into the lounge, the traveler attempted to dispel his anxieties by engaging in light conversations with fellow passengers. Some were fellow diplomats, while others were business travelers, each navigating their journeys with a sense of purpose. He found solace in the shared camaraderie of the space, a reminder that despite the systemic challenges they faced, they were all striving towards similar goals, whether in diplomacy, business, or advocacy. However, his thoughts were soon interrupted by the reality of the situation as the security personnel approached him. The suddenness of their presence, coupled with the scrutiny of his identity, triggered a cascade of emotions that threatened to unravel the composure he had worked so hard to maintain. The invasive questioning felt all too familiar, a stark reminder of the biases that lingered even in the most prestigious spaces. As he navigated the interrogation, the traveler's mind raced back to his upbringing. He recalled the lessons instilled in him by his parents, lessons about resilience, the importance of education, and the need to rise above prejudice. They had prepared him to face the world with strength, but no amount of preparation could fully shield him from the realities of racial discrimination. In that moment of questioning, he felt the weight of his ancestors' struggles on his shoulders. He remembered the sacrifices made by those who had come before him, who had fought against the tides of injustice in their own ways. It was a legacy of perseverance and determination that fueled his resolve to continue advocating for change, both within the UN and beyond. The traveler recognized that while his position afforded him a certain level of privilege, he was still navigating a world rife with challenges. The complexity of his identity as a Black diplomat required constant negotiation between asserting his authority and confronting the biases that sought to undermine it. It was a delicate balance that demanded unwavering courage, yet he remained steadfast in his commitment to his mission. As the questioning reached a critical point, and the security personnel began to process the information he provided, the traveler found a sense of clarity amidst the chaos. This incident was not merely an isolated encounter, it was part of a broader struggle against systemic injustice. The biases he faced were not unique to him. They were reflective of a society that had yet to confront its own prejudices. He understood that his experience could serve as a catalyst for change. By sharing his story, He could shine a light on the issues of racial profiling and discrimination within airport security, drawing attention to the urgent need for reform. The traveler believed that dialogue was a powerful tool, capable of dismantling the walls of ignorance and misunderstanding that often perpetuated systemic bias. In the aftermath of the encounter, as he continued his journey to the conference, the traveler felt a renewed sense of purpose. He recognized that while he may face challenges along the way, he was also equipped with the tools necessary to effect change. Armed with the knowledge of his rights, the support of his colleagues, and the resilience forged through years of experience, he was determined to amplify the voices of those who had been silenced by prejudice. Ultimately, the traveler's background, a blend of resilience, dedication, and advocacy, became a source of strength as he prepared to confront the challenges that lay ahead. He was not just a Black man navigating the complexities of travel. He was a UN diplomat committed to fostering global cooperation and addressing the injustices faced by marginalized communities. His story was one of empowerment, a testament to the power of perseverance in the face of adversity. As he embarked on his journey to the UN conference, the traveler carried with him the knowledge that every encounter, no matter how challenging, could serve as an opportunity for dialogue and change. He was resolute in his belief that by standing firm in his identity and advocating for equity, he could contribute to a world where individuals were valued for their contributions rather than judged by the color of their skin. The atmosphere in the VIP lounge shifted dramatically as security personnel approached the Black traveler. The initial cordiality of the lounge, filled with quiet conversations and the soft clinking of glasses, was replaced by a palpable tension. The traveler had settled into a space that was meant to provide comfort and exclusivity, only to find himself at the center of an encounter that was not just unwarranted, but also laden with assumptions and bias. As the security staff arrived, their demeanor was professional but somewhat rigid, exuding an air of authority that made the traveler feel scrutinized rather than supported. They were dressed in dark uniforms, adorned with badges and the logos of the airport security agency. The visible insignia served as a constant reminder of the power dynamics at play, heightening his awareness of the systemic structures that allowed such encounters to unfold. The lead security officer initiated the questioning with a rehearsed script outlining the reasons for their presence. "Sir, we need to ask you a few questions regarding your travel plans and identity. Can you please provide your boarding pass and identification?" The tone was matter-of-fact, yet it carried an undertone of suspicion that immediately set off alarm bells in the traveler's mind. The traveler complied, handing over his documents while mentally preparing for the barrage of inquiries that lay ahead. He recognized the routine nature of airport security checks. However, he could not shake the feeling that the questions directed at him were not purely procedural but rather influenced by the color of his skin. This assumption weighed heavily on him, exacerbating an already uncomfortable situation. As the officer began to probe deeper, the questions grew more specific. What is the purpose of your travel? Where will you be staying? Who will you be meeting with? Each question felt like a layer being stripped away from his identity, revealing not the diplomat he was, but a stereotype that had been unfairly imposed upon him. The traveler sensed a distinct difference in how he was being treated compared to other individuals in the lounge. He observed as other passengers, predominantly white and dressed in similarly upscale attire, sauntered past without so much as a glance from security. There was a stark contrast in the way he was being interrogated versus the casual exchanges occurring around him. It was a microcosm of the systemic bias that permeated society, and it was on full display in that moment. The security personnel, in their efforts to uphold safety protocols, were operating within a framework that often perpetuated racial profiling. This practice, while intended to mitigate risks, was tainted by underlying biases that led to disproportionate scrutiny of individuals from marginalized backgrounds. The traveler understood that security staff were often under pressure to act decisively, particularly in a world where threats were all too real. However, this pressure should not come at the expense of fairness and equality. The lead officer, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, continued to pepper the traveler with questions. Have you ever been to this airport before? Can you provide the names of the individuals you'll be meeting? The relentless nature of the inquiries felt increasingly invasive, and the traveler was reminded of the countless times he had been forced to assert his legitimacy in similar situations. Each question seemed designed to interrogate not only his identity, but also his very presence in the lounge. The psychological toll of such encounters can be profound, leaving individuals feeling dehumanized and objectified. The traveler could feel his heart racing as he contemplated the implications of the scrutiny he faced. He thought of the historical context of racial profiling, how it had manifested in countless ways over the years, leading to an environment where individuals were often treated as potential threats rather than valuable contributors to society. In the midst of the questioning, the traveler caught sight of a younger security officer who appeared more tentative and less sure of himself. This officer glanced between the lead officer and the traveler, perhaps sensing the tension but feeling constrained by the protocol that dictated their actions. It was a poignant reminder that, within any system, there are those who may question the status quo, even when the structures in place seem rigid and unyielding. The young officer's discomfort was palpable, and the traveler wondered whether he had ever grappled with the complexities of race and identity in his own life. Did he understand the weight of the encounter unfolding before him? Perhaps he had never been forced to confront the biases that others faced on a daily basis. The traveler felt a flicker of empathy for the young man, caught in a system that demanded adherence to norms that often disregarded the human experience. As the interrogation continued, the traveler attempted to engage the security personnel on a more human level. "I'm a diplomat with the United Nations," he explained, hoping to shift the narrative from one of suspicion to one of understanding. "I'm here for a conference focused on climate change. My work revolves around advocating for marginalized communities impacted by environmental issues." At the mention of his diplomatic status, he noted a momentary shift in the demeanor of the security staff. The lead officer's posture softened, and his tone became less confrontational. "Oh, I see. Thank you for providing that information. I just need to verify your credentials." This transition highlighted the stark reality that an individual's perceived status could alter the way they were treated, revealing the underlying biases that influence their interactions. As the security personnel began to verify his identity, the traveler reflected on the absurdity of the situation. He had spent years building a career that centered on diplomacy and advocacy, yet he found himself in a position where he had to prove his legitimacy based solely on the color of his skin. It was a painful realization that many Black professionals faced similar hurdles, even as they occupied spaces that were ostensibly designed for individuals of their caliber. The security staff's response encapsulated the broader systemic issues at play. They were operating within a framework that prioritized certain identities over others, often at the expense of individuals who did not fit neatly into established norms. The traveler understood that this was not merely a reflection of personal biases, but rather indicative of a larger societal problem, one that required urgent attention and reform. While waiting for his credentials to be verified, the traveler couldn't help but reflect on his previous encounters with security personnel during his travels. There had been instances where he had been profiled, subjected to additional scrutiny, or even denied access based on the color of his skin. These experiences were painful reminders of the systemic inequalities that persisted in various facets of life, including the travel industry. The traveler recalled a particularly harrowing experience at a major international airport where he had been pulled aside for additional questioning. The officers had asked him to step aside while other passengers passed through with minimal inconvenience. The humiliation of being singled out in a crowded terminal was overwhelming, and he had found himself grappling with a mix of anger and sadness. How could such blatant discrimination still exist in an era where diversity and inclusion were championed as core values? As he processed these memories, he was struck by the realization that his current encounter in the VIP lounge was a microcosm of the systemic biases that affected countless individuals. It was not just about one man being questioned. It was about a pervasive culture that normalized racial profiling and failed to acknowledge the dignity of all individuals, regardless of their background. When the security personnel finally completed their verification, the lead officer turned to the traveler and said, "Thank you for your patience. Everything checks out. We appreciate your cooperation." The abrupt conclusion of the questioning felt almost surreal, as if the entire episode had been a scripted performance rather than an authentic interaction. The traveler's heart raced with a mix of relief and lingering frustration. Despite the resolution the experience had left an indelible mark on him. He understood that the mere act of proving oneself, of asserting one's legitimacy, was not an isolated incident, but a repeated narrative that many individuals of color experienced in different contexts. The traveler felt compelled to share his story, to illuminate the inequities embedded within airport security practices, and to advocate for a more just and equitable approach. As he departed the lounge, he couldn't help but ponder the implications of his experience. What could be done to address the biases that were so deeply ingrained in the security protocols? How could individuals like him use their platforms to advocate for systemic change? The traveler recognized that while the encounter had been challenging, it also presented an opportunity to raise awareness and advocate for reform. In the days that followed the incident, the traveler began to engage in conversations with colleagues and fellow diplomats about their own experiences with airport security. He discovered that many had encountered similar situations, instances where they had been profiled or treated with suspicion despite their positions. These discussions underscored the urgent need for systemic change within airport security practices, emphasizing the importance of recognizing and addressing biases that disproportionately affected individuals from marginalized backgrounds. The traveler began to brainstorm ways to amplify these conversations on a larger scale. He envisioned organizing a panel discussion at the upcoming UN conference to address issues of racial profiling and discrimination in travel. By bringing together experts, activists, and fellow diplomats, he hoped to create a platform for dialogue and advocacy that could lead to tangible change. As he prepared for the conference, the traveler reflected on the power of storytelling. He understood that sharing personal narratives could be a potent tool for change, fostering empathy and understanding among those who may not have experienced such biases firsthand. By shedding light on his own experiences and those of his colleagues, he could contribute to a broader movement advocating for equity and justice within the travel industry and beyond. Ultimately, the encounter in the VIP lounge served as a catalyst for change, igniting a passion within the traveler to confront the systemic issues that perpetuated racial profiling. He was determined to use his voice and platform to advocate for a more inclusive approach to security practices, one that recognized the dignity and worth of every individual, regardless of their race or background. As the interrogation reached a fever pitch, a wave of frustration washed over the traveler. He had felt increasingly stripped of his dignity, treated as a mere suspect rather than a professional on an important mission. The relentless questioning felt more like a presumption of guilt than a standard security procedure, underscoring the uncomfortable reality of racial profiling. Yet, in the face of adversity, he was determined to assert his identity and reclaim his narrative. "Excuse me," the traveler interjected, taking a deep breath to steady his voice. "I think there's been a misunderstanding here. I'm a diplomat with the United Nations." His declaration hung in the air, heavy with the weight of his truth and the implications that accompanied it. He could see the reaction from the security personnel shift, their eyes widening in surprise as the gravity of his statement sank in. The lead officer blinked, momentarily taken aback. "A diplomat? I see. Can you provide your diplomatic identification?" The change in tone was immediate. What had begun as an encounter marked by suspicion and scrutiny was now shifting towards a more respectful engagement. The recognition of his diplomatic status fundamentally altered the nature of their interaction. The traveler felt a mixture of relief and disbelief as he retrieved his diplomatic passport from his briefcase. He had always understood the privileges that came with his position, yet the sudden transition in the officer's demeanor was jarring. It highlighted a painful truth, that an individual's worth could often be measured by their title rather than their humanity. The lead officer examined the passport closely, scanning the embossed seal of the United Nations and the official identification within. The other security personnel stood back, allowing their superior to take charge of the situation. The traveler's heart raced as he watched the officer's expression transform from skepticism to one of acknowledgement. "I apologize for any inconvenience, sir. We have protocols to follow, but your status as a diplomat changes the context here." The traveler nodded, feeling a surge of empowerment as he reclaimed his identity. I understand that security is important, but the assumptions made based on my appearance can lead to damaging encounters. I shouldn't have to prove my legitimacy based on the color of my skin. This acknowledgement of racial profiling was crucial, and the traveler felt a flicker of hope that perhaps this encounter could serve as a teaching moment for the security personnel. He had always believed in the power of dialogue and education, and he sensed an opportunity to bridge the gap between his lived experiences and the officer's understanding of their role. The lead officer, now appearing more at ease, nodded in agreement. "You're right, and I appreciate you bringing this to our attention. We're trained to recognize certain behaviors that could indicate a threat, but we must also remain vigilant about our biases. I apologize for not addressing you with the respect you deserve from the outset." The acknowledgement of bias, however small, felt like a significant step forward. The traveler sensed that the officers were genuinely reflecting on their actions, grappling with the implications of their initial assumptions. It was a moment that transcended the immediate situation, touching on the broader issues of racial profiling and systemic bias that affected countless individuals in similar scenarios. "Thank you for your understanding," the traveler replied, his voice steady. "It's crucial for all of us to recognize the impact of our actions. Racial profiling doesn't just affect individuals, it perpetuates a cycle of mistrust and misunderstanding that can have far-reaching consequences." The security personnel, now visibly more engaged, nodded in acknowledgement. It was clear that this encounter was not merely an isolated incident. It was emblematic of the broader societal issues that required urgent attention. The traveler felt a renewed sense of purpose as he engaged with the officers, recognizing that his voice could contribute to a larger conversation about equality and justice. As the lead officer returned the passport, he continued, "We take these matters seriously, and I assure you that your feedback will be noted. I appreciate your patience during this process. Please let us know if there's anything we can do to rectify this situation." With that, the atmosphere in the lounge began to shift back toward normalcy, but the traveler knew that the conversation they had started was just beginning. He felt an urge to further engage with the officers, to share his experiences as a diplomat and the systemic challenges faced by individuals from marginalized backgrounds. "I'd like to share a bit about my work," he said, gesturing to the nearby seating area where they could talk more comfortably. The lead officer seemed receptive, and the other security personnel appeared curious. "My role at the United Nations often involves advocating for the rights of marginalized communities around the world, particularly in the areas of environmental justice and human rights." The officers listened intently, their expressions indicating genuine interest. The traveler felt a sense of validation as he shared his experiences, his travels to countries facing environmental crises, his discussions with community leaders, and the importance of amplifying the voices of those often overlooked in international dialogues. Many of these communities are disproportionately affected by climate change and environmental degradation, yet they lack representation in decision-making processes, he explained. "As a diplomat, I strive to ensure that their stories are heard and that their needs are addressed. However, I also encounter obstacles such as racial profiling that can hinder my ability to do this work effectively." The security personnel nodded, recognizing the complexities of the traveler's narrative. The young officer, who had previously appeared tentative, spoke up. "I've never thought about it that way. It's easy to get caught up in protocols and procedures without considering the bigger picture. Your perspective is eye-opening." Encouraged by the officer's response, the traveler pressed on, emphasizing the need for systemic change within airport security and beyond. It's essential for security personnel to undergo training that addresses unconscious biases and equips them to engage with individuals from diverse backgrounds. We must move beyond simply following procedures and cultivate an environment of understanding and respect. The lead officer agreed, reflecting on the need for improved training within their organization. "You're absolutely right. We often focus on procedures but neglect the human element. This encounter has made me realize how crucial it is to approach each individual with respect and an understanding of their context." As the conversation continued, the traveler felt a sense of camaraderie forming between himself and the security personnel. They were no longer adversaries. Instead, They were engaging in a meaningful dialogue about race, identity, and the shared responsibility of fostering a more equitable society. This transformative moment was a reminder of the power of conversation in bridging divides and creating understanding. As the interaction drew to a close, the traveler felt a renewed sense of hope. He understood that while systemic change would take time, conversations like these were vital in challenging the status quo. "I appreciate the willingness to engage in this dialogue," he said earnestly. "It's a step toward creating a more inclusive environment for everyone." The lead officer extended a hand, a gesture of goodwill that signified a commitment to change. "Thank you for your understanding and for sharing your experiences with us. We'll take this feedback to heart, and I assure you that we'll work to improve our practices." The traveler left the VIP lounge with a sense of accomplishment, knowing that he had used his voice to advocate for change. It was not merely about one incident. It was about the larger implications of racial profiling and the need for reform in airport security practices. He felt empowered to share his story and engage in conversations that could lead to positive change. In the days following the incident, the traveler took to social media to share his experience, aiming to raise awareness about racial profiling in airport security. He emphasized the need for systemic change and highlighted the importance of educating security personnel on issues of bias and discrimination. His post quickly garnered attention, resonating with many who had faced similar experiences. As conversations grew around his post, the traveler found himself at the center of a larger movement advocating for reform in airport security practices. He began receiving messages from individuals who shared their own stories of racial profiling and discrimination, reinforcing the urgency of the issue. The traveler recognized that his voice could be a catalyst for change, and he was determined to amplify the narratives of those who had been silenced. Inspired by the outpouring of support, the traveler decided to organize a panel discussion at the upcoming UN conference, inviting security experts, diplomats, and advocacy groups to address the systemic issues within airport security. He envisioned a space where individuals could share their experiences, propose solutions, and work together toward creating a more equitable environment for all travelers. As he planned the event, the traveler reflected on the profound impact of his encounter with airport security. It had become a defining moment in his advocacy work, one that underscored the importance of dialogue and education in dismantling systemic bias. He felt invigorated by the prospect of using his platform to advocate for change and to foster understanding among individuals from diverse backgrounds. The panel discussion eventually took shape, attracting a diverse group of participants committed to addressing issues of racial profiling and discrimination in travel. The traveler felt a sense of pride as he stood before the audience, sharing his story and the lessons learned from his encounter with security personnel. "We must acknowledge that systemic bias exists within airport security practices," he said passionately. "It's our responsibility to confront these issues and advocate for change. By engaging in meaningful conversations and educating ourselves about the experiences of marginalized communities, we can work toward a future where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." The audience responded with enthusiasm, sparking a lively discussion about potential solutions to address racial profiling in travel. Ideas flowed freely, ranging from improved training programs for security personnel to the implementation of diversity and inclusion initiatives within airport security organizations. As the panel concluded, the traveler felt a sense of fulfillment wash over him. He had not only shared his experiences, but had also fostered a space for others to voice their concerns and propose solutions. The event marked a significant step toward raising awareness and advocating for systemic change within airport security practices. The traveler left the conference inspired by the collective commitment to creating a more equitable future. He recognized that while his encounter with airport security had been challenging, it had also opened the door to important conversations about race, identity, and the need for reform. He felt empowered to continue advocating for change, understanding that the journey toward equality and justice required perseverance, collaboration, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. As he reflected on the journey ahead, the traveler knew that his work was far from over. He remained dedicated to amplifying the voices of marginalized communities and advocating for systemic change within airport security practices. His encounter had become a catalyst for his advocacy work, inspiring him to continue engaging in meaningful conversations that challenged the status quo and fostered understanding among individuals from diverse backgrounds. In the wake of the incident in the VIP lounge, the traveler's experience resonated far beyond the confines of that moment. News of the encounter spread rapidly, catalyzing discussions about racial profiling and discrimination in airport security. As the traveler reflected on the incident, he recognized the potential for change that lay ahead, not just for himself, but for countless others who faced similar injustices in the realm of travel. Within days of the traveler's encounter with airport security, discussions began taking place within the airport authority regarding potential reforms. The lead officer's acknowledgement of bias during their interaction sparked a chain reaction, prompting a review of existing security protocols. Airport officials recognized that their procedures must be reevaluated to address systemic issues of racial profiling and discrimination. The traveler's story was brought to the attention of key decision-makers who understood the necessity of transforming security practices to foster an inclusive environment for all travelers. They convened an emergency meeting with stakeholders, including airport security personnel, human resources, and civil rights organizations, to discuss the implications of the incident. During this meeting, the traveler's experiences were shared, serving as a case study to illustrate the real-life consequences of racial profiling. Security personnel were encouraged to reflect on their assumptions and biases, sparking a critical conversation about the impact of their actions on individuals from diverse backgrounds. As a result of these discussions, the airport authority decided to implement immediate changes to their security training programs. They recognized that existing protocols often failed to address the nuances of racial bias and the need for cultural competency among security personnel. The traveler's encounter served as a catalyst for developing a more comprehensive training curriculum, focusing on understanding implicit bias, promoting empathy, and fostering respectful interactions with travelers. In the months following the incident, the airport authority rolled out new training initiatives aimed at addressing bias within security operations. The program included workshops and seminars led by experts in diversity and inclusion, who emphasized the importance of recognizing and confronting bias in security practices. These sessions aimed to equip security personnel with the tools necessary to engage with individuals from various cultural backgrounds, enhancing their understanding of the complexities of identity and race. The traveler was invited to participate in several of these training sessions, where he shared his experiences firsthand with security personnel. His presence provided a powerful narrative that humanized the statistics and theories surrounding racial profiling. By engaging directly with the officers, he fostered an atmosphere of openness and dialogue, encouraging them to consider the perspectives of individuals who might find themselves on the receiving end of scrutiny based on their race. As part of the training, security personnel were taught to approach each traveler as an individual, rather than relying on assumptions based on appearance. The initiative aimed to create a culture of respect and understanding within the airport environment. The traveler's story became a cornerstone of this training, emphasizing the need for empathy and awareness in security practices. The response to the incident extended beyond the airport authority, reaching the United Nations and various advocacy organizations committed to addressing issues of racial inequality. News outlets reported on the traveler's experience, prompting conversations about racial profiling and discrimination in security practices across the globe. The UN's Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs issued a statement expressing concern over the incident and its implications for diplomats and individuals from marginalized communities. They emphasized the importance of ensuring that all diplomats are treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their background. This statement galvanized support from various member states, encouraging them to advocate for systemic change within airport security protocols. Advocacy groups dedicated to civil rights and social justice seized the opportunity to raise awareness about the broader implications of the traveler's experience. Organizations such as the NAACP, the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, and various international human rights organizations released statements condemning racial profiling and calling for comprehensive reforms within airport security practices. These groups organized protests and public forums to draw attention to the issue, amplifying the traveler's voice and the need for systemic change. They highlighted the prevalence of racial profiling in various sectors, including travel, law enforcement, and public services, urging policymakers to take action to dismantle these unjust practices. The incident served as a wake-up call for the aviation industry, prompting a reevaluation of security protocols on a national and international scale. As the traveler's story gained traction, airports worldwide began examining their own practices regarding racial profiling and discrimination. Airport authorities across the globe recognized the urgent need to address these issues proactively. They began implementing measures aimed at fostering a more inclusive environment for travelers. This included revising training programs for security personnel, developing policies that emphasized respect and dignity, and creating mechanisms for accountability to address incidents of bias. The traveler's encounter underscored the necessity for transparency in security practices. Airports began to engage with communities to gather feedback on their experiences with security personnel. This feedback loop was instrumental in identifying areas for improvement and fostering trust between travelers and security staff. International aviation organizations, such as the International Air Transport Association (IATA), took notice of the growing concerns surrounding racial profiling. They began collaborating with member airlines and airports to develop guidelines aimed at promoting inclusivity and reducing bias in security operations. The traveler's story served as a poignant reminder of the need for systemic change within the aviation industry, prompting discussions about creating an equitable travel experience for all. As the momentum for reform continued to build, the traveler found himself at the forefront of advocacy efforts aimed at addressing racial profiling and discrimination in airport security. He began collaborating with civil rights organizations to amplify the voices of individuals who had faced similar experiences, creating a platform for them to share their stories. Through social media campaigns, community forums, and public speaking engagements, the traveler worked to raise awareness about the impact of racial profiling on marginalized communities. He emphasized the importance of solidarity and collective action in challenging systemic injustice. His efforts resonated with individuals from diverse backgrounds who had experienced discrimination in various forms. The traveler also began organizing community workshops aimed at educating individuals about their rights when interacting with security personnel. He believed that empowering travelers with knowledge would help them navigate encounters with security in a way that preserved their dignity and self-worth. These workshops provided a safe space for participants to share their experiences and discuss strategies for addressing bias when it occurred. In partnership with advocacy organizations, the traveler facilitated dialogues between community members and airport officials, fostering a sense of accountability within security practices. These discussions emphasized the importance of collaboration in creating a more inclusive environment for all travelers. Recognizing the need for systemic change at the legislative level, the traveler and advocacy groups began pushing for policy reforms aimed at addressing racial profiling in airport security. They collaborated with lawmakers to draft legislation that would prohibit discriminatory practices in security operations and promote accountability within airport authorities. The proposed legislation included provisions for regular audits of security practices, mandatory training programs on bias and cultural competency for security personnel, and mechanisms for travelers to report incidents of racial profiling. The traveler understood that meaningful change required a multifaceted approach, combining grassroots advocacy with legislative efforts to ensure accountability and transparency within airport security. As the legislative campaign gained traction, the traveler traveled to Washington, D.C., to meet with lawmakers and share his experiences. He spoke passionately about the need for change, highlighting the importance of creating a travel experience that respected the dignity and rights of all individuals, regardless of their race or background. His efforts garnered support from a diverse coalition of lawmakers, civil rights organizations, and community leaders. The proposed legislation was met with enthusiasm, reflecting a growing recognition of the need to address racial profiling in security practices. As the months turned into years, the traveler's encounter with airport security became a defining moment in the fight against racial profiling and discrimination. The changes initiated in the wake of the incident laid the foundation for a more inclusive environment within airport security practices. The airport authorities' commitment to reform inspired similar initiatives across the aviation industry, creating a ripple effect that resonated beyond borders. Security personnel were trained to approach each traveler as an individual, fostering an atmosphere of respect and understanding. The travelers' advocacy work continued to thrive, fueled by the support of community members and organizations dedicated to social justice. His story served as a beacon of hope for those who had faced similar challenges, inspiring them to raise their voices and advocate for change. In the end, the traveler's encounter with airport security was not just a singular incident. It became part of a larger narrative about racial equality, representation, and the fight against systemic bias. The legacy of his experience reverberated through airports and communities, fostering a culture of empathy and understanding that transcended borders. As he reflected on the journey, the traveler felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had contributed to a movement aimed at creating a more equitable future for all individuals. He remained committed to advocating for change, understanding that the fight against racial profiling and discrimination was far from over. With each story shared, each dialogue initiated, and each policy reformed, he felt hopeful that a brighter, more inclusive future was within reach. The incident involving the black traveler and airport security transcended a mere moment of discomfort. It became a pivotal event that sparked critical conversations about race, identity, and systemic bias within the aviation industry. As the dust settled and the implications of that encounter unfolded, it became evident that this story was not just about one man's experience. It represented a broader struggle for justice, equality, and respect in a world where racial profiling often remains a pervasive issue. At its core, the traveler's experience illuminated the urgent need for racial equality and representation across all sectors, particularly in areas that influence people's lives and freedoms, such as airport security. It highlighted the complexities of navigating a world where biases can shape perceptions and interactions, often leading to unjust treatment based solely on the color of one's skin. The traveler's identity as a UN diplomat added another layer to the narrative, revealing how even those with esteemed positions can become victims of profiling. This reality speaks to a troubling phenomenon where systemic biases intersect with perceptions of authority, power, and worthiness. The traveler's encounter served as a stark reminder that regardless of one's status, individuals can still face discrimination that undermines their dignity and humanity. In the aftermath of the incident, the power of advocacy and collective action became increasingly apparent. The traveler's willingness to share his story and engage with others fostered a sense of community and solidarity among individuals who had faced similar challenges. By amplifying these voices, he not only raised awareness about the issue of racial profiling but also encouraged others to confront their experiences and advocate for change. The various responses from civil rights organizations, the UN, and community members demonstrated a collective commitment to addressing systemic injustices. This solidarity served as a powerful reminder of the importance of coming together to challenge the status quo. As more individuals began to share their experiences, it became clear that the fight against racial profiling was not just a singular battle. It was a movement rooted in the collective pursuit of justice and equality. As the traveler's story gained traction, it became evident that meaningful change would require systemic reform within airport security practices. The incident underscored the necessity for policies that not only address overt acts of discrimination but also dismantle the underlying biases that perpetuate such behavior. The new training initiatives implemented by airport authorities were a significant step forward, but they needed to be part of a broader commitment to equity and inclusivity. Security personnel must be held accountable not only for their actions, but also for their understanding of the social dynamics at play in their interactions with travelers. This means cultivating a culture that values diversity and recognizes the inherent dignity of every individual. Comprehensive training programs that focus on cultural competency, empathy, and respect for human rights are essential in this endeavor. Airport security personnel must be equipped with the knowledge and tools to navigate the complexities of identity and race, enabling them to approach each traveler as an individual rather than relying on preconceived notions. Additionally, the establishment of clear reporting mechanisms for incidents of racial profiling is crucial. Travelers should feel empowered to voice their concerns without fear of retaliation, knowing that their experiences will be taken seriously and addressed promptly. This transparency fosters trust between security personnel and the communities they serve, creating a safer and more respectful travel environment. As the dialogue surrounding racial profiling continued, there was a growing recognition of the importance of inclusive policies that promote equity in airport security practices. This meant not only addressing the immediate concerns raised by the traveler's experience, but also considering the long-term implications for marginalized communities. Airport authorities and security organizations must prioritize the development of policies that explicitly prohibit racial profiling and discrimination. These policies should be accompanied by clear guidelines for enforcement, ensuring that security personnel are held accountable for their actions. Moreover, collaboration between airport authorities and civil rights organizations is essential in creating an inclusive framework for security practices. By engaging in dialogue with advocacy groups, airports can better understand the concerns of marginalized communities and develop policies that reflect their needs and experiences. This collaborative approach fosters a sense of ownership and accountability, ensuring that all stakeholders are invested in creating a more equitable travel experience. Education is a fundamental pillar of fostering change in attitudes and behaviors surrounding racial profiling. It is essential not only for security personnel, but also for travelers themselves. As individuals become more aware of their rights and the challenges faced by marginalized communities, they are better equipped to advocate for themselves and others. Public awareness campaigns aimed at educating travelers about racial profiling and their rights when interacting with security personnel can empower individuals to speak up against discrimination. These initiatives should emphasize the importance of respectful dialogue and highlight the shared responsibility of both travelers and security staff in creating a positive travel experience. Additionally, integrating discussions about racial bias and discrimination into broader educational initiatives, such as diversity training for all airport staff, can help cultivate a culture of respect and inclusivity within airport environments. By fostering a sense of community and understanding, airports can work towards dismantling the barriers that perpetuate bias and discrimination. The traveler's experience serves as a clarion call for systemic change, urging society to confront uncomfortable truths about racial profiling and discrimination. While the airport security reforms initiated in the wake of this incident are commendable, they must be part of a larger movement toward equity and justice across all sectors of society. Individuals, communities, and organizations must continue to advocate for policies and practices that promote inclusivity and respect for all individuals, regardless of their background. This advocacy requires persistence and dedication, recognizing that change is often met with resistance, but is essential for creating a just and equitable society. Engagement in local and national advocacy efforts can amplify the voices of those affected by racial profiling, providing platforms for individuals to share their stories and advocate for change. Community organizing, coalition building, and grassroots initiatives can create a powerful movement for social justice, ensuring that the fight against discrimination remains at the forefront of public discourse. Leadership plays a critical role in driving systemic change within airport security practices. Decision-makers must be held accountable for fostering inclusive environments and ensuring that their policies reflect a commitment to equity and justice. Diverse representation within leadership positions is essential in this regard, as it brings different perspectives and experiences to the table. Organizations must prioritize diversity in hiring and promotion practices, ensuring that individuals from marginalized communities are represented in positions of power. This representation fosters a culture of accountability and understanding, enabling decision-makers to recognize the nuances of racial bias and the impact of their policies on diverse communities. As society reflects on the implications of the traveler's encounter with airport security, it is essential to embrace a vision for the future, one that prioritizes equity, justice, and respect for all individuals. This vision requires collective action, ongoing advocacy, and a commitment to dismantling systemic biases that perpetuate discrimination. The traveler's journey, fueled by his experiences and advocacy, serves as a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of confronting injustice. His commitment to amplifying the voices of marginalized communities and advocating for systemic change underscores the potential for transformation within society. In this ongoing journey, each individual has a role to play in fostering a culture of understanding and respect. By engaging in conversations about race, identity, and the need for reform, society can create a more inclusive environment where all individuals feel valued and respected. Ultimately, the traveler's experience highlights the urgent need for a collective commitment to addressing racial profiling and discrimination within airport security practices. As society strives toward a more just and equitable future, it is crucial to remember that change begins with individual action and collective advocacy. The journey toward equality is ongoing, requiring persistence, resilience, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. As the traveler continues his work to advocate for change, he embodies the spirit of those who have come before him, individuals who dare to challenge the status quo and fought for justice, equity, and respect. The story of the Black traveler who faced discrimination in a VIP lounge is more than a singular incident. It represents a call to action for individuals, communities, and organizations to join together in the fight against racial profiling and discrimination. By embracing a vision of equity and justice, society can create a future where all individuals are treated with the dignity and respect they deserve, regardless of their background.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.